What's up everyone, Jason Turley here, back with another video. Today we'll be looking at the Damn Vulnerable Web App, or DVWA. As the name suggests, this is a very vulnerable web application or website that you can host on your own computer. Practice web penetration testing, find different web vulnerabilities, such as SQL injection, command injection, local file inclusion, and stuff like that. In this video, I'll be going over how to install the source code, how to set it up, and just a brief overview of what it is and the different features and functionalities it has, and why it's something you may be interested in. So scrolling down, you see I'm on the GitHub page, github.com/digininja-dvwa. I'll leave a link to that in the description below. We see this blurb here. DVWA is a PHP/MySQL web app that is damn vulnerable. Its main goal is to be an aid for security professionals just like us to test their skills and tools in a legal environment. It can help web developers better understand the processes of securing web apps and to aid both students and teachers to learn about web application security in a controlled classroom environment. The aim of DVWA is to practice some of the most common web vulnerabilities with varying levels of difficulty. And as a very simple and straightforward interface, please note they're both documented and undocumented vulnerabilities. This is intentional. You're encouraged to try and discover as many as you can. So basically what they're saying, hey, some of the vulnerabilities, maybe the low level ones, the easy ones, those are documented, and those are kind of like the freebie babies first, pen test babies first website vulnerability challenge. And the other ones are undocumented. They're made to be more difficult, harder to find. Those are for the seasoned professionals, the ones who have been around the bush and they kind of know their thing. In big, bold letters, we see warning with an exclamation point. So this is a vulnerable application, right? This isn't something you'd want to install on a publicly facing website or web service, and it's not something you can probably run on your host computer. You want to do something inside of a virtual machine. I'm using VMware just because that's what I'm used to, but VirtualBox works as well. They're both free and easy to install. I won't go over that in this video, but there's a million tutorials and websites and videos online on how to install those if you need help. More disclaimers, licenses, other languages if English is not your forte, and we scroll down here and we see this link to download. So we're going to grab this and copy it to our clipboard, and we're also going to step over here to this guide, right? I'll leave a link for this in the description as well, but this is a guide on how to install DVWA on Kali Linux. That's what I'm using, but on any Debian-based operating system, Kali Linux, Ubuntu, Parrot OS, the steps are going to be nearly identical. So we see they broke it out into 7 steps here, nice and organized, and we're just going to follow through scrolling down, and I'll give my commentary as we install it. So what I'm going to do is move this over to the left side, and then I'll open a terminal and move my terminal to the right-hand side, make it nice and big. To get started, we're going to cd into var html, and this is the default web directory that Apache will use or Nginx will use on a Linux system. I can do an ls. We see there's not really anything here. I have the default index.html. If I really wanted to, we'd cap that out. But this is just the default landing page that comes pre-installed with this. Nothing fancy, nothing we care about. So we're going to git clone that GitHub repository that we saw earlier, and I get a permission denied because my Kali user, a regular user, does not have access to this folder. Right, we see only root can write to it. So I can just add sudo in front of all of my commands, or I can do sudo su to switch to the root user, just to make it a little bit more simple. If I do an ls, we see DVWA is now installed. Continuing on with this, we see here that they rename the directory to all lowercase, just because in Linux, your case does matter, right? You can leave it capitalized. It really doesn't make a difference, but just for like following along with the tutorial and making it a little cleaner, we're going to leave it lowercase. As you can see here, these are all lowercase. It really doesn't matter. It's personal preference. But now we're going to cd into that directory. I can do an ls, and we see all the stuff that was over here on the GitHub page. All these folders, all these files and configs are now installed in my web directory. All right, after downloading and cloning DVWA into your directory, we need to make some minor changes. So we want to set this to read, write, and execute permissions, because currently, let me cd out of this. If I do an ls like L, it doesn't have full permissions for everything. And just to make things easier going forward, let's make it readable, writable, and executable for everyone. We used a tac capital R to make it recursive. So now everything in this folder will have these permissions, right? Everything is readable, writable, and executable. Scrolling down. So after successfully executing this command, we need to set up the username and password that we will use to log in and access the database. So we can cd into the config directory, ls tac L. Cool. So we see this file here, config.inc.php.dist. So this is the default config file that comes with the system. You could leave this, you could rename it however you want. However, we're going to copy it and just take off that .dist. So now this original one is still here for the backup, and then we can work with this regular .php config file and edit that. And if we make a mistake, if we blow it up, if we erase it, we still have the backup file if we need it. We see here, that's exactly what they do. They copy it, they rename it, and they open it up. Here's a big mistake, right? They open it up in Nano, which is a text editor for Linux machines, where they should have used Vim, because Vim is just all around better. And this is how our database will be configured, right? So we see down here, the database server will just be localhost. That's perfectly fine. The name of the database and the username are DVWA, and here's the password. We can change that if we want. I don't like DVWA as the user, so I'm gonna change this to admin. And that password with the @ for the A and the 0 for the O is too complicated for me to remember. So I'm gonna change this to password, :W to save. We can change the port if we want as well. 3306 is just the default port for SQL databases. So just for the sake of it, we're going to leave that the same. There's no real reason to change it, but you can if you want. Perhaps you have an actual legit SQL server running and you want this to run alongside it, you can change the port. But since I don't have any other SQL server running, we're going to leave it as default. Exit out of Vim. Okay, so I exited out of Vim with a Shift ZZ, but you can also just do Q to quit, or you can do WQ to write and quit. Just in case you've never used Vim before, it can be very confusing to exit. Scrolling down, we're already on step 3, install MySQL. So by default, this is one reason I like Kali Linux. SQL and PHP, Apache, they're all installed by default. So I shouldn't really have to install anything, but if you need to, it shows you how to do it here, apt install default MySQL server. So now we can just configure it. If I do a quick process listing and grep for MySQL, nothing is running, right? This is just my grep command. That's not actually SQL. Let's do a service, MySQL start. Okay, now I can do service MySQL status. Nice, and it prints it all out, it's running, and it gives us the processes as well. If I really wanted to, I could hit the up arrow a few more times, go back to my grep command, and now we see it is running as Maria DB, something like that. Yeah, Maria database daemon. Cool. Now we want to log in to our SQL server, make sure it's working, and add some config changes. Here, they just do MySQL with the username of root, because that's the default user, and then TAC-P to specify password. Hit enter. We're going to leave the password blank because that's the default login when you first install it. Scrolling down, we want to add a user for our DVWA. Here they just name everything user. So we're going to copy this, paste that in. You can hit enter and leave this as it is, but just for, I guess, conciseness, I'm going to rename this to admin and make the password so it matches our login prompts that you'll see later on. So create a user named admin on localhost, so our current machine, and identified by password. So that's how they will log in. Hit enter. Cool. Query OK. Now we want them to have full privileges to this database, the DVWA database. So we're going to do that with this line here. Copy and paste that in. And once again, I'm going to change this to password because that's what their password is. And they're not named user. Their name is admin. Feel free to leave all this as default in the guide if you want. I'm just changing it because that's how I just want to configure it. So next, installing PHP. So we can quit out of here. I believe PHP is already installed on the system as well. I can do a which PHP. Yeah, PHP is installed. So we can skip step 5 if you're using Kali Linux or Parrot OS. But if not, maybe you're using like Ubuntu or some other Debian-based thing where it's not installed, you can copy and paste all this in and it will install the latest version of PHP on your system. Scrolling down. Now we want to configure the Apache server. I never know if this is Apache or Apache. Let me know. So now we need to configure the server. So this is the web server that will host the website, right? So use the command below to change your location. Okay, so we're just going to cd to Etsy, PHP. Now hit tab. You see mine is 8.2, whereas theirs is 7.4. Well, this guide was made a few years ago. So 7.4 is no longer the latest version of PHP, which is a programming language if you're not familiar. So my Kali Linux is updated to 8.2, which is, I don't know if that's the most version, but it was the most current version when I installed Kali Linux. And then Apache 2, smash enter. We're doing ls-tech-l, we can check out what's in here. Not much. We have a php.ini file, so that's their config file. They open it up in Nano, but we're going to open it up in Vim, php.ini. And this is the PHP config file, right? PHP's initialization file, generally called php.ini, responsible for configuring many of the aspects of PHP's behavior. So I love how these are commented, and you can read through this and you can learn a bit about PHP, the server language, and you can learn a bit about this file. It even gives you tips and instructions if you're using this for a Windows platform, but we're on Linux just because that's a lot simpler for any type of programming or cybersecurity research. So in this file, there's two values that we want to look for: allow URL fopen and allow URL include. So I'm in Vim, so I'm gonna hit / and start typing allow URL. You can see it's highlighted here, and these are our two things we want. So allow URL fopen, with fopen meaning file open. So, hey, can you open files in the URL? And it specifies it here. And we want to leave that set to on. By default, that's how it is, and we want to leave that. And then the next value, whether to allow or include open URLs as files, we're going to change that to yes or on. This will come into play later on when we start messing around with web shells and different file inclusion vulnerabilities. We want those set to on. Since we made some changes, we need to restart this service. So service Apache 2 start. That's going to take a little bit. And now we can do service Apache 2 status. Nice. Okay. Disabled. Active running. Here's the process it's running as. It looks good. If I really wanted, I could do a netstat tag pant, hit enter. Let me move this over so it's a little easier to read. So here's our SQL, localhost 3306, and here is our Apache 2 web service listening on port 80. Nice. Scrolling down, step 7, access DVWA on your browser. Okay, so all we have to do is navigate there. Let me open this up in a new tab that I'll move over here. Paste in our URL. So if yours was all capital, you would make this capital here, DVWA. Actually, I'm not sure if it matters, right? Yeah, okay, that doesn't work. So we need it to be lowercase DVWA because that's what we renamed it as. It automatically redirects us to login.php and nothing is showing up. That's weird. It should take us to setup.php. Let's change that. Setup.php. There we go. Okay, I'm not sure why it auto navigated to login, but we want setup. Click on create/reset database button below to create or reset your database. If you get an error, make sure you have the right creds. Okay, you can use admin password to reset if you need to. So it's doing a little check. This is our PHP version, 8.2. We see in the guide there's a 7.4. All right, some stuff is disabled. Let's click on this, create reset database. Okay, what's it say in the guide? Oh, okay. So this populated with our login page. Oh, ignore this, that's from something else. Admin, password, login. No, don't save. Nice, okay. So I think that was the last step in the guide. We don't need this anymore. Let me make this full screen. Zoom in a little bit. So there we have it. We finally installed it. If you're at this section, if you're on the index.php, if you have this landing page where it says, welcome to the damn vulnerable web app, you successfully installed this program, this tool. So we see the same description and usage and instructions as we saw earlier on that GitHub page. So cool. You see down here, if you can see in this little corner, right? The username admin security level is currently set to impossible. Language is English and our database is MySQL. So what does this mean? What is security level impossible? Why is it set like that? If we go over here to DVWA security and click on that, security level is currently impossible. You can set the security level to low, medium, high, or impossible. The security level changes the vulnerability level on DVWA with low. So this is the security level. It's very vulnerable, as no security mitigations whatsoever. This is not something you would want to see in a real website, right? No security mechanisms at all. It's just an example of how web apps can manifest through bad coding practices and serve as a platform to teach basic exploit techniques. So if you're a brand new beginner, you want to set it to low, and then so on and so forth. Everything else should be pretty self-explanatory. Medium, it has a couple security measures installed, but they're pretty bad. They're still misconfigured. High, so this is better. It's still not ideal. You can still hack it. You can still find vulnerabilities and perhaps gain some type of remote code execution. And then you have impossible. So this should be the security. So this level should be secure against all vulnerabilities. It is used to compare the vulnerable source code to the secure source code. Okay, so this is the ideal installation where there's no vulnerabilities. There's nothing that any outside threat actor or hacker or security researcher can do. And this is just so you can look at the source code of the website, the actual implementation, and compare it. Like, hey, wait, this is the good secure website compared to the insecure website. So that's pretty neat. So I'm gonna change this from impossible to low, click submit, and we see our security level has changed. So once again, just to reiterate, you do not want to run this on a publicly facing website. So if you have something you're hosting on DigitalOcean or GitHub, right, in some type of VPS, virtual service provider, anything like that, you don't want this running because this will be easily exploitable. So there you have it. That's how you install DVWA on Kali Linux. If we go back quickly to the GitHub, if you're on a different system such as Windows, they have install instructions here with a video on Windows 10 and Windows using XAMPP. And just like everything else on Windows, it's going to be kind of convoluted and have a bunch more steps. So continuing on in the series, we're going to go through all these different sections here. We see brute force, command injection, CSRF, file inclusion, upload, etc. And all of those have 3 different difficulties: low, medium, and high. We're going to solve all of them. So there you have it, folks. That's it. Let me know in the comments below if you had any issues, any questions. Hopefully this is straightforward enough. I know I kind of breezed through a little bit of it, but this is what it should look like when everything is all installed. If I do my netstat again, we can see everything listening, everything's up and running, everything is good to go. So I'll leave any relevant links in the description down below, as well as a link to my Patreon and other things I'm affiliated with. As always, take it easy and see you guys in the next video.